Okay, so today I'm going to update a video that I originally recorded back in late 2009 that became a lot more popular than I originally anticipated that it would, called Why I'm an Amiga User in 2009. Now I thought I'd kind of do a little bit of a new take on it because back when I recorded that video I was using AmigaOS 4 on my Amiga 1 machine, which is still booted up behind me. I'm in a different office now. I've moved house a couple of times since I recorded that video. But today I thought I'd give you a little bit more of a general overview on the next generation Amiga scene in 2011, including a look at the latest edition of AmigaOS 4. We'll also explore MorphOS as well. I've recently installed on a PowerPC Mac Mini, and hopefully I'm going to try and give you a little bit of an overview to AROS as well, the x86 version of AmigaOS. It's kind of a variant of it. So hopefully you can stay with me for the next few minutes while I give you a brief overview of the current next generation Amiga scene. Okay, so before we start this video, I thought I'd give you a quick overview on the hardware that I currently run the operating system on, as the last video on YouTube, one of the most frequently asked comments on there was, can I run this on my PC? Unfortunately, AmigaOS and MorphOS both require PowerPC hardware. In the case of AmigaOS 4, I've got it running on a 2005 machine from iTech, which is called an Amiga 1 XE, which is a PowerPC G4 based machine. There was a few different models made by iTech back then, but they all kind of got discontinued around 2007-ish, if I remember rightly. There have been a few new models introduced that will run AmigaOS 4, including the SAM 460 and the SAM 440 range, which I'll include links to in the description of this video. And there is a new high-end powered machine coming up in hopefully the next year or so. It's been delayed a bit, called the Amiga 1 X1000, which I'll also include a link. You can learn a little bit more about that if you're interested. So I've actually got my Amiga 1 XE in a Commodore gaming case that was made by an OEM that basically licensed the Commodore name a couple of years ago and made these quite high quality gaming cases. I thought they were really nice actually, and I'll probably do a review of the case at some point. Unfortunately, they don't manufacture these cases anymore, and even though Commodore have kind of got nothing to do with the Amiga these days, or the successive companies that have licensed it, it's really just quite a slick case to make it stand out a little bit more from all of the faceless PCs that I've got lying around. It was quite an expensive case, about £250, but it's all quite glossy, and I think it looks, it's got quite an impressive look to the machine. You've got a little Amiga badge down there too. That's my Mac Mini that I use for MorphOS. It's a Mac Mini G4, the high-end one with 64 megs of graphics RAM. Also got 1.5 gigahertz G4 processor in there and 1 gigabyte of RAM as well. So I have these just located on top of each other. I haven't got a KVM switch at the moment or anything like that, so literally if I want to swap between them, it's a case of plugging in USB and monitor cables into it, but hopefully I'll eventually get that sorted with a better solution. Also on here as well, I've got a Mac Mighty Mouse and also an Apple Slimline keyboard too, which I quite like for the fact that it's got no Windows keys on, so that's quite cool for an Amiga operating system. Running on an Acer 22-inch monitor, and we're currently looking at the AmigaOS 4.1 desktop, so I'm going to first of all crack on and show you a little bit of AmigaOS 4.1 on this machine. Okay then, so first of all I'm going to demonstrate a few of the features of AmigaOS 4.1. I'm using the trusty old method of zooming a video camera into the monitor, unfortunately. There is screen capture software available, but to be honest, it's just meant to be a quick and dirty demonstration, so I'm just going to show you around. It is an HD video camera, so hopefully it will be clear enough. Now you're looking at the desktop of AmigaOS 4.1. I've customized it slightly with the addition of a second dock down the side here that you may have seen in my original video, and also a calendar application called Limpig Clock that was quite popular on the earlier versions of AmigaOS. Also got a custom wallpaper on here too, but apart from that, everything else is pretty standard really. Now a few features of the Amiga operating system that I really like, for example the RAM disk, that some people on my original video were asking, what's the point of a RAM disk in the 21st century? Well really it's for downloading software and install files and things that you might not want to keep permanently. On my Windows machine now, I've got a downloads folder that's probably, contains about 200 gigabytes in there. On my Amiga machines, I put things in the RAM disk, install them, and then on reboot, it's gone. So we've got the system directory here. If you'd ever used maybe AmigaOS 3 back in the day, things are pretty similar today. You've got your preferences directory there with various bunch of system preferences to change anything and everything that you want about the machine. Utilities directory remains as well. You've got, even stuff that's remained there since the really early days of the Amiga, stuff like the old system clock. It still lives on. Stuff like key show. A lot of the stuff in here is basically just rewrites of the old applications that you find on AmigaOS 3. But also looking around the machine as well, we can go into the system directory here, which is stuff that comes with the machine mainly and also gives you options to tweak things. And there's an error trapping system in OS 4 called the Grim Reaper, which kind of overtakes the old Guru Meditation error. And that will trap errors and give you information on why programs have crashed if they have. Looking at a few of the apps that I've got running at the moment, we've got Sabre MSN, which is an MSN client, which is really cool, programmed by a guy called Jack. Yam, which is quite a famous application on the classic Amiga, which still runs really well under OS 4. There's actually a PowerPC version of it specifically, which is one of the nicest email clients I've ever used. I've also got Amiga Amp running in the background as well, which is kind of like a version of Winamp that was quite famous on AmigaOS 3 with the Hackers soundtrack on there at the moment. I also got OWB, which is quite a nice little CSS WebKit based browser for the Amiga. Now there is a more superior version of this on MorphOS, but that version is actually getting ported over to AmigaOS 4 in the next few months hopefully, so we'll have a much nicer web browser available then. But as you can see, it renders sites such as Leo Laporte's Twit network. They're all rendered really nicely, and you can still run the old classic Amiga browser if you want to get like an authentic feel. The old iBrowse app from AmigaOS 2 and 3 that was quite famous. It still runs flawlessly under AmigaOS 4. You've also got the screen system that the Amiga's famous for, which is actually really cool. I still prefer this to stuff like the Linux Cube. Just being able to fan down screens and see the different programs that you've got running natively in their own public screens in the background, and you can also flip between them with the little depth gadget in the end. I'm running Directory Opus here, which is also another famous Amiga app from way back when, and it works really well. This is actually a native PowerPC version of it, so you can go through your folders and look at things in here, which is kind of cool. I like having Directory Opus around just for a quick and easy way to browse through the drawers on your machine rather than having to go through the workbench all the time. I've also got my machine into 3 partitions. The work partition here that contains stuff like PageStream, which is quite a famous Amiga application. Classic apps like Wordsworth run really well on OS 4, which was quite a powerful word processor back in the day. We're also waiting for an Open Office port, which will be coming in the next year or so, hopefully. Other stuff I can show you in here, we've got Milky Tracker, which is quite a nice little application for playing old Amiga mods if you're an Amiga fan back in the day and you still love playing all these old sound modules that the Amiga was famous for. You can still play all these. So if you're a big fan of Pro Tracker and everything back in the day and Octamed, then you'll enjoy playing around with that. Even applications from the 90s, stuff like Octamed Sound Studio, do work just fine in AmigaOS 4. As you can see, I've got it running up here, which I used to spend hours on. Text editors like Golded, that I was a big fan of. So a lot of 68K apps function great under AmigaOS 4. Artifact, it was kind of like a basic version of Photoshop for the Amiga that still functions just fine in here too. And one thing you'll find by running the classic apps on OS 4 is they'll behave just as you expected them to when you used them under like OS 3 and everything back in the day, but you'll find that they run a lot faster now as well. It's kind of like you using one of the most high-end Amigas you could imagine, running these old applications under more modern implementations of the Amiga operating system. I think that's probably an error sound that I had left over from my old Amiga 1200 days. A South Park sample, if I'm not mistaken. So stuff like, the old Digitus suite I've got running here. So, that's part of the appeal of running OS 4 for me, is the fact that I can kind of recreate my old Amiga experience from ages ago and kind of have it in a more modern environment, really. This work disc that I've got here is a copy of the original work disc that I had on my Amiga 1200 back in 1995, just with new things added to it over the years. But you'd be surprised by how much of the classic applications still run just fine under OS 4. So that's a quick look around AmigaOS 4. I went probably a little bit more in depth in my last video, but I think for the scope of this video, I just want to kind of give you a look at it really and see how things behave. I mean, it also plays modern movies just fine. If you've got, like, you know, a copy of Sandra Bullock movie, The Net, which I know was a little bit cheesy, but I was quite a fan of this film when it came out, just for Sandra Bullock really. So you can watch videos on OS 4 just fine. It also plays DVDs in here too, so while it does retain a lot of the feel of the original Amiga OS, you can also do more modern day stuff with it too. So now I'm going to move on to the next variant of Amiga OS. We'll have a look at MorphOS on my PowerPC Mac G4. Okay, so now we're looking at the desktop of MorphOS on my PowerPC Mac Mini G4. And MorphOS has actually got quite a long heritage behind it, probably longer than AmigaOS 4 actually. It was originally conceived back in the late 90s to be a continuation of AmigaOS, when it was a time in AmigaOS's development really that it looked like the platform had kind of come towards the end of its life and it wouldn't really get developed any further. A time when SCOM had gone bust and Gateway had brought the Amiga but weren't really doing anything with it. So a group of guys got together and created a PowerPC native version, kind of like a next generation version of the Amiga operating system that they named MorphOS. Now originally it ran on classic Amiga machines with PowerPC accelerator cards, and then it was ported back in the early 2000s to a few different unique platforms like the Pegasus and the Effica, and more recently the MorphOS team have actually ported it to PowerPC Macs, including the Mac Mini, the Power Mac and the eMac as well. And as I showed you before, I'm running MorphOS on a PowerPC Mac Mini G4. Now I went onto eBay to try and find the most high-end PowerPC Mac Mini that Apple ever designed, and this is a machine I've got it running on. And I've got to say, it feels really nice running MorphOS on this machine, as it originally came installed with OS 10 Tiger, and it was really slow. But running MorphOS on it, you know, it's everything that you'd expect from an Amiga operating system. It's really fast and responsive. And considering it's running on a 1.5 gigahertz machine, which is lightning fast for an Amiga operating system, but, you know, for Apple OS 10, that's really slow in this day and age. So you really do get some extra usability out of this old hardware by running an operating system like MorphOS on there. And as with my Amiga OS 4 machine, the system is organized into traditional Amiga file structures. You've got the RAM disk in here, also got the system drive and the work disk on here too, which again, like with my OS 4 machine, is a copy of my original Amiga 1200 hard disk with a few new things that have been added to it over the years. MorphOS is actually a little bit more compatible, believe it or not, with old Amiga applications than OS 4 is. Some stuff, for example, like Cygnus Editor, which was quite a famous text editor back in the day on the Amiga. A lot of the old, when my camera focuses, a lot of the old ASCII artists used to design a lot of their stuff in here. My camera's having a bit of trouble focusing on it, but it's not the most exciting view in the world anyway. It's a text editor. I find this crashes quite a lot under OS 4, but runs really well with MorphOS. Also stuff like Dulux Paint and everything, you can still run on here just fine. Now I've installed a little bunch of applications on MorphOS called the Ultimate Pack, which gives you a lot of pre-installed third-party public domain apps that come bundled with the Ultimate Pack. It also gives you this nice little dock down the bottom too, that's separated into different categories. So you've got internet applications, web stuff, organizer tools, audio applications. So a lot of the apps that I showed you in my last video have also been compiled for MorphOS as well. Like we've got Yam, the Amiga mailer. On this machine I use another Amiga mailer called Simple Mail, which handles full HTML emails quite nicely. So just to kind of get, you know, a different flavour, I tend to run Simple Mail on MorphOS and Yam on OS 4. Now one thing about MorphOS, it's based on a standard called MUI, Magic User Interface. It was conceived on the original Amiga platform back in the 90s as a replacement for the original Amiga, basically the Windows and graphics system and the gadgets and everything. And from the ground up, MorphOS is based on MUI, a new version of it called MUI 4. And the replacement for the Amiga Workbench is a desktop called the Ambient, which we're looking at the moment. And it's got a few of the nice features from MUI on here, for example, you know, mousing over and getting information on things. And also, if you're a fan of the original Amigas and use something like Directory Opus Magellan on it, MorphOS is very reminiscent of that. it kind of feels, I'll be honest, I think OS4 feels a lot more like an Amiga, but MorphOS feels more like a development of that platform. It's still got a bit of the Amiga flavour in there, but it kind of feels like an Amiga-influenced operating system with a more modern feel to it, which essentially is what it is. Even some simple little things that you can't do in OS4 that you'd expect to do in modern operating systems, like being able to, right-click and copy, and then pasting files around that you still can't do in OS4 because it's very closely tied to the original Amiga platform, where you'd have to make a copy of it or go into the Amiga shell and do it that way. And also you've got these buttons at the top that, quite reminiscent of Directory Opus. And systems here for looking at different icon views, whether it's lists or icons, and looking at, hidden folders or thumbnails if you've got like a graphics directory, which is quite handy for that. So I think at the moment, I've only been using MorphOS for a couple of months, but it is kind of my Amiga OS of choice right now. And a lot of the classic Amiga apps, stuff like AmiIRC, which is actually the IRC client that XChat was based on, that functions just fine, and there is a MorphOS port of it too. So if you're a fan of IRC, there's quite a nice client available on MorphOS. And even stuff like the browser that we've got on here. I mentioned in the last video that there is a CSS compatible browser for the Amiga platform called OWB. Now on OS4 it's very basic, but on MorphOS it is really, it's pretty much a fully native application. It feels kind of like a modern development of something like iBrowse or AWeb that were the original Amiga web browsers. You've got some functions in here like graphical thumbnails and shortcuts at the top here. It's got a really nice download manager included too. That's very reminiscent of iBrowse, which was an Amiga browser back in the 90s. All stuff that you take for granted on modern platforms, but for a platform as old as the Amiga, that's kind of seen a lot of neglect really over the years. Some of the stuff that's offered to in MorphOS, retaining that Amiga flavour, but it also gives you kind of a more modern feel on things as well. So I think if you're looking to get into the Amiga OS at the moment, I think MorphOS is probably one of the most low-cost solutions. I mean, I've looked on eBay and you can get stuff like an eMac or a PowerMac G4 for pennies literally, and then a license for MorphOS is about €111 at the moment, I believe. But there is actually a free version that you can download and try out for free if you wanted to have a little play around with it. It functions just great for half an hour, then it slows down. If you've got a license key, then you can use it 24/7. And one thing that I do find about MorphOS is that it is a lot more stable, I find, in day-to-day use than OS4. I don't know whether it's just my configuration, but I find that I do get a lot less crashes using MorphOS than I do with OS4. And one thing that you'll find with the Amiga platforms is that most of the applications that you'll see, stuff like OWB and Amiga AMP and stuff like that, generally get ported to most different flavours of the Amiga operating systems, whether it's OS4 or MorphOS or AROS. You'll generally get the same applications on all machines really. And some of the high-end stuff that is quite fun to play around with, stuff like Audio Evolution, which is quite a nice little audio editing suite that I tend to play around with quite a lot on MorphOS and OS4 as well. They're available cross-platform too, so it's definitely worth having a look. If you're maybe an Amiga user back in the day and you fancy having a bit of a look at an updated kind of Amiga platform with the same feel that you got back in the day, I'd highly recommend having a look at MorphOS. It's a lot of fun to play around with, and like I said, there's quite a low price entry point to it too. So now we're going to have a look at AROS, if I can get that functioning on the PC that I've set aside for it. We'll have a little bit of a look around the x86 version of Amiga OS. Now the next flavour of Amiga OS I'm going to show you is AROS, which runs on bog standard x86 PCs. So for all the people that have been commenting on my original video saying, can I run the Amiga operating system on my PC? This would be the flavour to try. And also it's pretty cool because it's completely free as well. Now the goal of AROS is literally that, to make a variant of the Amiga operating system that will run on any bog standard x86 PC hardware. And that's been the goal of it for the last 10 to 15 years. And it's actually developed a little bit slower than the other variants of the Amiga like OS4 and MorphOS, but it's getting there, day by day. Now the version that you want to download to try it out, particularly if you want to try it like I am now from a live CD, That means you can actually try it on your Windows PC without erasing anything. If you do a Google search for Icarus Desktop, or follow the links that I'll put in the description of this video, that will take you straight to a website that you can download a live ISO from. And then you can either just try it out for a little while, or you can then choose to install it to your hard disk as well. Now, AROS uses a desktop system called the Wanderer, which is its version of Workbench. As you can see, if you are familiar with the Amiga Workbench, it's very similar. You've got the what would originally be the Workbench menu, the windows, icons, and tools and everything. Going to the live CD that I've got here. Obviously, it will run a little bit slower because I'm running this off a CD-ROM rather than a hard disk. The icons are all very reminiscent of the Amiga, and also stuff like the preferences. If you're familiar with AmigaOS at all, then you know all this will look very familiar to you. It's basically a rewrite that is API compatible with the original AmigaOS, but you know, as you can see from looking around, it's very similar to it. But there are some nice new developments, like for example the way we see the drawers open within themselves here, and we've got a little back widget there too, and some of the skins that it's got are quite nice as well. It's probably the least familiar Amiga strain that I run. I mean, I don't really know my way around AROS all that well. The only things that I really know are from using original Amigas through it, but I haven't really spent a lot of time with it. Now that I've got a machine that is dedicated to it, I probably will spend a bit more time with AROS because I've heard some good things about it. But if you're familiar with the original Amiga machines and you'd like an operating system that kind of retains a lot of that flavour, then I definitely recommend that you download some of the ISOs that are out there, like the Icarus Desktop. Also stuff like the clock that I showed in my OS4 video still lives on. This is the AROS version of OWB. The web browser is Bundle 2, which handles CSS, and it's actually one of the nicer variants of OWB. It's got a full download manager. It's quite similar to the MorphOS version, a lot more advanced than the OS4 OWB currently. And I think you'll find, if you were a fan of the Amiga, that you'll feel really at home with AROS. Screen dragging, I believe, has been implemented in an experimental form, but it's not included in this live CD that I've got here. Directory Opus, a version of that, which runs quite nicely. And all of the traditional file system layouts that you know and love from the Amiga are all in here still. Stuff like, the S directory and C and libs and everything. So I haven't gone too in depth into AROS because, like I said, it's kind of the strain of AmigaOS that I'm least familiar with. But if you were a fan of the AmigaOS, or even if you're just a little bit curious, I'd highly recommend giving this a download and trying it out, even if it's only from the CD, because it's completely free of charge to download and try on your PC. And as I said, the links are included in the description to this video. Now next I'm going to take a look at the latest version of the classic AmigaOS. Now I've got many and various classic Amigas in my office as well, including an Amiga 600, which I recently did a video review on. You can check in my channel if you're interested. And also an Amiga CD32 console with a label that I made the mistake of putting on back in the 90s and I'm currently trying to get off. With loads of games on it and everything. But the machine that I'm going to concentrate on for this next part of the video would be my Amiga 1200, which has had a few upgrades over the years. I'll talk you through a few of those. I've got it hooked up currently to a Samsung 24-inch HD TV via a nice, I'm just going to take the microphone with me, so excuse if you get any rumbling, a nice little SCART cable that was ordered from Amiga Kit. So it goes from the Amiga's RGB port, and then if you can see in the back of the monitor there, it goes into the SCART port on the back of there. Also in here too, I've put an accelerator card inside it as well, which I'm not going to open up the machine on this video, but I will do a future video showing the expansions, but you can see at the bottom there. And that was also ordered from Amiga Kit, featuring, I think it's about 70 megabytes of RAM on there, and a 68030 chip on it as well at 25 megahertz, which gives it a nice little speed increase over the original 14 megahertz 020. Now in the side here I've got a PCMCIA Ethernet adapter, which allows me to hook this into my router and get the Amiga 1200 online, which is something that I originally did back in the day. The A1200 was actually the first machine I ever got on the internet with at home, so getting it back online again was kind of cool. So I'm going to put the camera back on the tripod and kind of show you around the latest version of AmigaOS 3. Okay, so what I've got installed on my Amiga 1200 is the last version of the 68K Amiga operating system, AmigaOS 3.1, that came out back in 2002. And I've actually got an update pack installed on this called Classic WB, which I'll include the links to in my video description. But it's basically a third-party download that includes a lot of public domain applications, again similar to the Ultimate Pack on MorphOS. Now, this is literally a brand new install of Classic WB, and there's a few things I haven't yet configured on this machine. I've recently wiped out my OS 3.5 install, which means I can't quite get online with this machine just yet. I'm going to have to install Miami on it so I can get it running, but stuff like AWeb, which is the classic Amiga web browser, will work just fine on the internet when I eventually do get around to setting up my network on this machine. I mean, it's all wired up and everything. It's probably not going to be the nicest experience browsing on a 25 megahertz machine in 2011, but for stuff like email and IRC, and I mean, even looking at simple web pages like this, just to prove that it can be done, the fact that the old Amigas can still go online, it's kind of a bit of novelty factor, really. That's all I really use this machine for. It'd be good for like chat rooms and stuff. I think for IRC, this would be quite a nice little machine to get on there with. Now, if you've never used 3.9 before and you're familiar with the Amiga operating system before this, you'll be quite familiar with the layout of it. Stuff like the utilities drawer are still in here. The clock that I seem to show you in every install that I've gone through today for some reason. And the Say app, which I don't know if that's going to work. Oh, there we go. That was all something that was quite popular on the original Amiga machines. Getting them to say swear words, of course. Yes, that was hours of fun when I was in my teens. So, I mean, it's basically just a version of OS 3 with a lot of public domain software added to it, really. I've also got the system disks and work disk on here too, like I have on my MorphOS and OS4 machine. And again, it's still just a carryover of my old Amiga 1200 from the mid-90s. Again, I've copied the files from, machine to machine over the years. So I can still run all these classic apps that I used to really enjoy way back when. Stuff like, Octamed that I showed you on OS4. Of course, runs really well on this machine here. And one thing I do like using authentic Amiga hardware for, as well as all the old apps that we used to know and love, obviously back in the 90s, is gaming, of course, which the Amiga is very famous for. Now, on this machine, I've got a system called WHD Load that you may be familiar with. That means I can put all of my old floppy disk-based games onto the hard disk of this Amiga. So, as you can see, looking through here, I've got pretty much all the games that I used to know and love back in the 90s installed on the hard disk of this machine. And it doesn't take up much room at all. I mean, it's only 32% full. And it's actually a 4 gigabyte compact flash card inside this Amiga that I've split into two halves. So, it was low cost. It cost me about £9. And it lets me run all of these classic games. And also, it's got really nice box artwork included in them all as well. So, if you're a fan of these games, being able to click them from these really nice looking icons as well that they include, like Batman the movie, stuff like this, being able to play them again on the modern hardware. It's definitely worth having authentic hardware to do it. I mean, I understand that a lot of people like emulation, and emulation's a very cheap and easy route into it these days, but for me, there's something about being able to play these classics as they were originally intended on this hardware that, I originally grew up using. So, we've gone a bit off the productivity route here, but you might remember this classic game from the 90s, Higher Guns, that, was a big favourite with me and my brother when we were kids. Being able to play all these old games again on this hardware is still really cool. And you can run it in OS4 and MorphOS in emulation, but I think there's something a little bit special about being able to run it natively and on the original machine that you grew up using. I mean, emulation's all well and good, but, being able to use the machine that you grew up using again You can't beat it. So there you go. That was a quick overview of where the Amiga stands in 2011 and a little bit of history in there as well. So hopefully you really enjoyed this video. And if you've got any questions at all, feel free to contact me. You can get my Twitter links and my website and everything from checking the video description. Thank you for watching.